This week, we're going to be focusing on the empires of the Near East, in particular the Muslim empires of the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughal dynasty in India, as well as the empires of the Far East, in particular the fall of the Ming dynasty, the rise of the Qing dynasty in China, as well as the rise to power of the Tokugawa shogunate in Japan. And we will also touch on the relationship of these empires to the European powers that were beginning their voyages of exploration, and as we enter into a more global economy and an international world. Before we can understand the Muslim empires of the Near East and the empires of the Far East, we need to understand a little bit about their religions and their philosophies. And so I'm going to spend a few minutes now talking about the Islamic faith, its rise and what it meant, and then also the Confucian philosophy that dominated in China. The Islamic religion is one of the modern world religions that came onto the scene very, very late, which really helped to shape the nature of this religion. The Islamic religion was founded by the Prophet Muhammad. Muhammad was born around 570 to 571 CE, which means the Common Era or the Christian era. Muhammad was raised by his grandfather, and his grandfather was a businessman. So Muhammad, as he became of age, also followed in his grandfather's footsteps and was also a businessman by trade before he became the supreme prophet. As a businessman at this time in the Arabic world, Muhammad traveled quite a bit, and so in his travels he was exposed to a number of different ideas and philosophies that helped to form his religious beliefs. Around 610 CE, Muhammad began to be a little disillusioned by the world, and he began to have transmissions or messages that came to him through the angel Gabriel from God, Allah. And Muhammad realized very quickly that these messages were not meant just for him, that he was meant to carry these messages to the people. And so Muhammad shaped these messages that he received from the angel Gabriel, that was the word of Allah. He shaped them into a new religion that he called Islam, or that was called Islam, meaning submission to God. Followers of the Islamic faith are known as Muslims. Muhammad immediately began to proselytize, or to take his message out to the people and to gain converts to this new religion. But what makes Muhammad unique among religious leaders is that he not only was gaining converts to his new religion, he was also gaining political followers, and he became the first Muslim political leader and formed the first Muslim state under his own political leadership. So Muhammad was not just a religious leader, he was also a political leader as well, which we don't typically see in the religious founders of the other faiths. So what does Islam mean? What are the core beliefs of the Islamic faith? Well, there are four basic core beliefs. The first is very simple, that Allah is the one and only God. Islam is a monotheistic religion, as is Christianity. Both Catholicism and Lutheranism and all variations of Christianity are monotheistic, meaning they believe in one God. As a monotheistic religion, these faiths tend to be very rigid in their guidelines and their dogma. When you talk about polytheistic religions, where people believe in more than one God, such as the Hindu faith that dominated in India, in the subcontinent of India, these religions are a little bit more flexible. As they take over new territories, they can bring those gods into their pantheon of gods because they have many of them. Islam, Christianity are not that way. They're very rigid in their dogma and their beliefs. So the first core belief of the Islamic faith is that Allah is the one and only God. The second core belief is that Muhammad is the supreme prophet. Now, what's interesting about Islam is that Islam recognized the prophets of the Old and New Testament. They recognized that Christianity was another monotheistic faith. They just simply believed that Christianity was a flawed faith. So in the second point, that Muhammad is the supreme prophet, Muslims believe that Jesus and the other prophets of the Old and New Testament were prophets, but they just believed their message was flawed. So the third core belief of the Islamic faith is that if you believe in points 1 and 2, that Allah is the one and only God and Muhammad is the supreme prophet, then you are equal in the eyes of God. or in the eyes of Allah. Now, this was a huge selling point to Muslims, to Muslim converts, much like Luther's idea that we are all, the church is a fellowship of believers and everyone is equal in the eyes of God, was a huge selling point for the Protestant faith as well. Because in society, most people were not equal. So here you have these religious leaders that are now telling them that, yes, you might not be equal in society, but in the eyes of God, if you follow these certain rules, you are equal. And so that was a big selling point for Muhammad to gain converts to his new faith. The fourth key belief of the Islamic faith is that Islam is the perfection of all religions. As I said, because the Islamic faith comes onto the world religion scene so late, they really have the benefit of looking back at the previous religions and saying, okay, this worked, this didn't work, and they feel like they have created the perfect religion, the perfection of all religion. There are three key books in the Islamic faith. The first being the Quran. Now, the Quran is similar to the Christian Bible with a big exception for Muslims. Muslims believe that the Quran is the direct word of Allah as transcribed by humans. The Bible is the word of God, but it is interpreted by humans. And so the Muslims believe that the Quran is an even holier book than the Bible because it does not have human interpretation. The humans simply transcribed the word of Allah into the Quran. The second book that's important to the Islamic faith is the Hadith. The Hadith is the traditions of Muhammad. You see, Muhammad did not write anything down. He let his followers do that. And so his followers collected what he said, what he did, the traditions that he put into place into this book called the Hadith. And so when Muslims try to figure out what they're supposed to do, they typically look to the Quran as well as to the Hadith. What did Muhammad do? What does Allah say we are supposed to do? And that's how they come up with what they believe they should do. The third key book that is very influential in Islamic religion and Islamic empires is the Sharia. The Sharia is the religious book because, again, politics and religion go completely hand in hand. They're completely intertwined. And so Sharia is the book of law, of Muslim law, that typically governs in Islamic societies. Now, around 680 CE, there was a split in the Islamic faith. And the split happened over who should be the next rightful ruler in the Islamic states that had been developed. The split is into two factions that still exist to this day. They are the Sunni Muslims and the Shiite Muslims. Now, the Sunnis are the dominant faction. More people in the modern world are Sunni Muslims than Shiites. Shiites are the minority. The Sunni Muslims believed that anyone who was capable could be the political leader, and that you could have a political leader that was not the religious head of state, but was the political head of state if they were capable, and then you would have religious leaders that would advise that individual. The Shiites, however, believe that in order to hold the highest political office in the state, you must also be the religious leader as well. So you must have a blood tie to the Prophet Muhammad. Because he was the first religious and political leader, Shiites believe that in order to be the top political leader, you must have a blood relation to the Prophet Muhammad. This split has grown deeper over the years, and Sunni and Shiite Muslims still typically do not agree and get along up to the modern day. The empires that we've talked about, the Ottoman Empire, they were Sunni Muslims, and the Safavid or the Persian Empire were Shiite Muslims. And the state of Iran today in the modern world, they are typically Shiite Muslims in Iran as well. Now let's turn our attention to Confucianism for a few minutes. Confucianism is the dominant philosophy in the Chinese empires. And the China typically kind of set the stage for what was going on in the other Asian empires. And so oftentimes in Japan and Korea, they would follow Confucianism as well. Well, what does Confucianism say? Well, Confucius said that there are 5 basic relationships that govern society. Those relationships are ruler to subject, father to son, husband to wife, elder brother to younger brother, and friend to friend. Now, the 5th relationship, friend to friend, is slightly different, but the first 4 relationships are very clear. In all 4 of these relationships, there is a dominant person listed first, the ruler, the husband, the father, the elder brother, and there is a subordinate person in the relationship, the subject, the son, the wife, the younger brother. Now, friend to friend, there is a bit of equality in that relationship, but many times at different points in friendships, there will be somebody who takes a more dominant stance and someone who takes a more subordinate stance in that relationship as well. What Confucius said was these relationships are there for a reason. They're there to provide structure and stability to society and to our lives. He said that the dominant person in these relationships has a responsibility to look out for the best interests of the subordinate person. The subordinate person, in turn, has a responsibility to do what the older person, the dominant person, says, because they are ruling in their best interest, or they are making decisions in their best interest. So, husbands should take care of their wives, and wives should obey their husbands. Fathers should take care of and do what's in the best interest of their sons. Sons, in return, should respect and follow their father's lead. Now, when it comes to ruler to subject, the Confucius, in particular, those in China, believed in what's called the mandate of heaven. And the mandate of heaven said that the power to rule the Chinese people comes from the heavens, comes from the gods. And when you were given the mandate of heaven, this is a great privilege, and you have a big responsibility. As Confucius says, the ruler should rule in the best interests of the people, and the subjects should then follow and do what the ruler says. And the mandate of heaven says if you do not do that, if you do not follow that ruler to subject relationship, then you have lost the mandate of heaven. So what we see happening time and time again in Chinese history is as an empire is in decline, the people begin to rebel and revolt, and then the Chinese people believe that that particular ruler, that dynasty, has then lost the mandate of heaven because they are not ruling in the best interest of the people, obviously because the people are rebelling. Once order is restored under a new dynasty, the people accept that new dynasty because they believe that the mandate of heaven has now passed to the next dynasty. So in specifically looking at the Ming Dynasty goes into crisis mode. There are widespread famines. They've spent all of their money trying to defend Korea from the Japanese. And so the people are upset and hungry, and so they begin to rebel. The Ming Dynasty falls, and the Qing Dynasty is established in 1644. The Qing Dynasty is a foreign dynasty. It is the last dynasty to hold power in the Chinese nation until the modern day, when we see nationalism and then ultimately communism come into play. The Qing Dynasty, though, is a foreign dynasty. It is ruled by the Manchurian people, who are a kind of barbaric people that live just to the north of China, just to the north of the Great Wall of China. And but the Chinese people accept the Manchurians because they believe that because they have helped to restore order, they now have the mandate of heaven. As you're reading through the chapters 20 and 21 in your textbook and you're looking at these empires, one other thing that I want you to consider is how these empires were impacted by the contact with Europeans, because Europeans, as we know, are at this point in history expanding their borders, they're dominating trade, they're spreading their life and customs all around the world, and they definitely come into contact with these empires of the Near East and the Far East. And so I want you to pay attention to what that contact means. How are both the European and the empires of the Near and Far East impacted by this interaction between Europeans and Asians?